Good afternoon. My name is Sergey Khan, and I'm a faculty member in Anthropology and Native American Studies. And the main introduction of our guest, Preston Singletary, will be done by John Steinberg, the director of the Hood Museum. But I will say a few words because I have a pretty close connection to our guest on a number of fronts. And I did make effort to bring him here. He's a very busy artist and difficult to get a hold of, so I think we're fortunate to have him here. It's a real treat for all of us, and for me especially. I want to thank the Hood Museum, and particularly Kathy Hart, for being my partner in crime and bringing him here, for generosity of the Hood Museum, and the Native American Studies program for its contribution, and particularly our chair, Melanie Benson-Taylor. As a faculty member teaching courses in Native Studies, I really appreciate, since the time I came here many, many years ago, the fact that the Hood Museum has been, for a number of years now, showcasing contemporary Native American art and artists. And I think this is an example of that commitment. Artists from different Native tribal nations, different communities, working in different media, and purchasing Native American art. And this object, this beautiful bowl, is Preston's own creation that we own. And this is how I first heard of Preston's work, through this beautiful object that I introduced to my students. Unfortunately, now the museum is closed. We can't bring students there. But after I learned about this work, I started looking for it on the internet, and then met Preston a couple of years ago in Alaska through a tribal conference that I've been one of the organizers of, and I realized that we absolutely have to have him here. He's a wonderful artist, trained in different national traditions, European traditions, American, but with deep roots in his own Native American Tlingit tradition. And my own research and life commitment, really, in scholarship, and very much my own life, is with the same Tlingit nation of Southeast Alaska. So there was just no doubt in my mind that I have to make a real effort to connect Dartmouth and Preston Singletary. Preston's roots, through his maternal grandmother and great-grandmother, are in Sitka, which is also the community that I've worked with since 1979, long, long time ago. And it actually turned out that Preston's clan, the Kagwantan, who claim brown bear, wolf, and possibly also killer whale, is the same clan that I was adopted into in 1980. So turns out that we're even probably brothers. So I've sort of, there's a relative connection here as well, kinship. So without further ado, I turn it over to John Steinberg, but I want to say thank you, Preston, for finding the time for us.
So welcome. My name is John Steinberg. I'm the Virginia Rice Kelsey Director of the Hood Museum, and it's a thrill to have you all here tonight. First, I want to thank Sergey Khan and all of our colleagues in Native American Studies here at Dartmouth College. Even though I'm a newcomer here, I know that this has been a long and productive collaboration between the Hood and the department, and let's keep going. I think that it's always great when we can keep working together. Good things come from that. I've long been an admirer of Preston Singletary's work, and it's one of the greatest joys of starting a new job. To discover the work of an artist you admire is already a treasured part of the collection. The Hood's Tlingit crest hat from 2006, which you see here, is also on view upstairs in the Kim Gallery. I hope you get a chance to see it. It's a brilliant example of how Preston flawlessly melds the non-traditional material of glass with traditional Tlingit motifs and forms. Further, at the time of the Hood's 2011 exhibition, Native American Art at Dartmouth, his work was on the cover of the exhibition brochure that year, and it was also featured in a lot of our PR. So this is one of those works with which we associate on a regular basis. An institution is often associated with special works of art, and this has really become one of those works for us. So thank you for that. We're really thrilled. And over the last 25 years, Preston has forged a new and productive relationship between European glass-blowing traditions and Northwest native art. His artworks feature themes of transformation, animal spirits, and shamanism through elegant blown glass forms and sand-carved Tlingit designs. In more recent years, he has mined modern sculpture to reappropriate forms once inherent in the object-making traditions of peoples around the world, but especially those of his own Tlingit heritage. Singletary single-handedly, say that 3 times fast, Singletary single-handedly represents the 2 major threads of art that we think of in the American Northwest: studio glass and Tlingit visual forms. He learned the art of glass blowing by working with artists in the Seattle area, collaborating with many of the major figures working today. And he learned much of his imagery from working with Tlingit elders. Through this process, he has forged an approach, glass blowing, with a style, Tlingit, at once distinctive and contemporary, while remaining true to a rich cultural heritage. Preston has been the subject of countless exhibitions, but when you see how young he is, you might be amazed to know that he's already been the subject of a mid-career retrospective. Preston Singletary Echoes, Fires, and Shadows, which traveled around the country. His work is now included in major collections around the country and, in fact, around the globe. And he is the recipient of an honorary Doctor of Arts from the University of Puget Sound. As Sergei said, we couldn't be more honored in having him here with us tonight. So please join us in welcoming Preston Singletary.
Thank you. Hello. Well, thank you for coming, and thank you to everybody that worked so hard to get me here. And Sergei, of course, your book has been one of my original sources of inspiration, so it's really nice to come and spend time with you all. So in this presentation, I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of how I came to become the artist that I am today, and give you some of the different things I've been involved with that sort of inform that process and has informed that process all along. So I grew up in Seattle. The Space Needle is my homing beacon. I've never found a reason to leave there except for my brief travels when I lived up in Alaska for about 3 months, and then I lived in Stockholm, Sweden for about 6 months. But everything I was doing was happening in the Seattle area, so it's kept me there all along. I am from the Kagwantan clan, and this is my great-grandmother here, the woman in the center, Susie Johnson Bartlett Gubatayo. She lived to be over 100 years old, and she died in the early 80s. So we grew up with her around us, and always emphasizing where she came from, and she wanted us to be, under no uncertain terms, understand that where we came from, and who she was within the community. My family does claim that we are descendants of Katlian, which is one of the famous chiefs in the Sitka area. So I guess that's used to be his street, I guess, I don't know, up in Sitka. And so this is my great-grandmother, a few years later, visiting up in Alaska. I think this was just, I don't think she had anything to do with the Eagle's Nest house, so that's confused a lot of people I've been discussing my family history with. But so she was widowed in 1919. So my great-grandfather was and my great-grandmother had several children, one of which was my grandmother, and she remarried this man here, Dionisio Gubatayo, who was a Filipino man who had traveled and ended up in Alaska for the fishing and the cannery. So we're of the Eagle clan, and the killer whale fin is where they have us listed as within the box house structure. So this is my son when he was a few years younger. He's now 16. Some of my extended family. The two eldest in the picture here have passed on as of last year, and this is my father doing what he does best. My mother also. So my grandmother ended up marrying a Filipino man as well. So this is my mother, who is technically, I guess, a Tlingit, and she is, so I like to show this because music was my first passion as an artist or as a young person. I played piano, I switched to guitar. My parents were always, so I attribute a lot of my creative inspiration from my parents, my father was always dabbling in all kinds of things. He would paint and he would write poetry. He was very well read. He was a great outdoorsman, of course, fishing and mountain climbing. And so I guess I grew up thinking like I could do anything I wanted. My mother was playing guitar. She was also doing lots of handicrafts and macrame and that kind of thing during the 70s. And so very industrious. And so I like to mention that about where I got my creative inspiration. This is my wife from Sweden. These are my kids. Yeah, so as I mentioned, music was the one thing that I thought that I would pursue as a career. I would always want to check the box rock star, but and years later I finally decided that since I wasn't going to appear on the cover of Rolling Stone, that I should probably get serious, and I ended up falling back on my art career, which began in about 1982 when I started blowing glass at the Glass Eye Studios. This was one of the first glass artists that I ever met, Paul Marinoni, whose son Dante Marinoni and I went to high school together. Here we are at that time. We're about 19 and blowing glass together, and we continue to be friends and work together. This is one of the teams that I worked with for Benjamin Moore. He was Chihuli's right-hand man for several years and was the artistic director at the Pilchuck Glass School, and he had his own studio, and I worked for him. So basically I learned through practical experience. After a couple of years in the factory making Christmas balls and paperweights and small blown glass things, I ended up working with Benjamin, and lots of people came through his studio, and so I gained a variety of experiences, like different sensibilities, how to make work for other people, assist them in their work. So the earliest things that I did were more reflective of classical forms. They're the type of things that were the people that I worked with. We were all into this sort of functional, decorative kind of approach. I was attracted to modernism of the 30s and 40s, and so that's what I feel like. These kinds of pieces reflect that sensibility, and these ones are actually ones I made after my 6-month stay in Sweden, and I think they reflect a bit of a Scandinavian sensibility there. But working with Benjamin, we had incredible opportunities working with Dale Chihuly and Lino Tagliapietra, the Italian master who's coming over from Murano and teaching us the glassblowing techniques, the Venetian glassblowing techniques. But all the time, I'm thinking about what can I do to create my own approach to artwork. And we have, totem poles around the city in Seattle, and I was always looking at this and wondering, like, how would I conjoin that? So I like to attribute that with a kind of a genetic memory that was awakening within my psyche. The earliest things that I did were, I continue to do this all along, but I'll make objects that kind of look like Northwest Coast pieces. And of course, the hat forms that when you turn them upside down, they become a bowl. So my aunt, was coming to see a little exhibition, and some of the earliest pieces I had put together. And at the studio at Benjamin Moore's, we would have a holiday open house, and Benjamin had these beautiful pedestals in this, nice setting with the perfect lighting coming down, and we as the assistants often had a table, a card table over in the corner. But so my aunt asked, well, can we put the hat on the nice pedestal with the light and see what it looks like? And so I said, sure, and we took Benjamin's piece down, and I picked up the bowl, and about 10 people had followed us. And as I placed it on the table and these shadows came through, everybody was like, oh, look at that. And I thought, well, yeah, that's what I intended all along, of course. That was like the eureka moment for me. It's like this. And so that was kind of like how it started, and people were responding to these pieces that I was making. So there's a little contrast of like the traditional object and how I represent it. Now, this shows a pretty broad variety or a broad range of time. As my skills evolve, then I'm able to, accomplish, greater and greater things or more detailed things. So this is, some examples of those. I mean, some of you may know that, the Northwest Coast objects were everything was ornamented. Everything had a design on it. All the dishes and the spoons and everything, and the clothes. And these pieces, these rattle forms are, these are inspired by the traditional object. They're all my original designs. Over time, I've figured out how to create the design works and make them my own. But these things, to me, allude to the spirituality of the community, of these pieces. Of course, they're my own, just admiring it as a sculptural object, but in the original use for these things was probably, was used for a healing ritual of some sort, depending on the need. So anyway, so these are the things that I like to look at, and I spend a lot of time reflecting on these things. I could have been a happy little glass blower and making things all my life, but this has become much more fulfilling for me as I connect with these designs and think of it on a much deeper level. And one of the last conversations that I had with my grandmother, and she died a little younger. She was about in her mid-70s, but she said that if anyone were to look at her life's work, they would have to look at her grandchildren. And so today, this has a significant meaning to me as I'm representing my family, my community, my tribe, and all of the above. So, so this is an interesting piece because this is sculpted out of a bubble, just free, just a bubble of glass that's poked and prodded, and then all of the details are carved in with the sandblasting process later. So here you have like a war helmet. So these are inspired by the kinds of objects, the traditional objects. There's the ladle, sheep-horn ladle. And as you can see, all of these objects had things designed on them. So that's why I take that, and figure out all the different formats that I can do these kinds of designs. This piece is a little larger than small, amulet that it was. So again, it becomes more sculptural object to look at. The copper forms. This is quite large. It weighs about 200 pounds and it's about 56 inches tall. So I'm currently working on, and I have been working with elders within the community, and one guy in particular, Walter Porter, was one of the guys that from Yakutat who really encouraged me to share his perspectives on the raven story and other mythologies. I used to refer to him as the Tlingit Joseph Campbell. He drew parallels from all kinds of mythologies from all around the world and saw the commonalities. And so we were about ready to embark on creating an exhibition that I am in the process of developing now. So this will be, I call it a theatrical installation, and it's going to be the glass objects that, as you walk through the exhibition, you will get aspects of the story, and from the beginning. So I'll go through that a little bit, and this was also is going to be enhanced with sound. So I'll get into the music side of my creativity, and then also video projection to sort of create like a theatrical backdrop for the objects themselves. So you may know this story, but I'm going to be kind of abbreviated here too. This raven was around in the beginning of time when the world was in darkness, and he went to the fishermen of the night and learned about an old man who lived at the head of the Nass River and had the daylight in his clan house. So he went to the old man and asked if he could come inside, and the old man shooed him away, wouldn't allow him to come in, so Raven had to devise a plan. He'd heard about this old man's daughter who would take a drink from the spring, natural spring outside of that clan house in the morning. So Raven transformed himself into a speck of dirt, floats down the stream, and then she scoops him up. But her attendants check for the purity of the water, and they see that there was a little dirt in there, and so they cast it out. So Raven has to reformulate his plan, and he transforms then into a hemlock needle the next day. She scoops it up, and this time doesn't notice it, swallows the hemlock needle, and Raven is now inside of her, and she becomes pregnant. And so Raven grows inside of her as a human child, and so she gives birth to Raven as in the form of a human child. And the old man is excited that he has a new family member, a grandson, and so the Raven child was very precocious and shifty-eyed, and had been scouting around the clan house, and he found a box and then asked to play with the box, and the old man put the box down, and the Raven played with it until nobody was looking, and then when he found his moment, he opened up the box and he took the stars, the first box is the stars, and he places them into the night sky. And so a couple days later, he finds this next box and asks to play with it. The old man obliges him, and he again plays with the box until nobody's looking, and then he takes the moon out of the box and he places it in the night sky. So then, a few days later, he comes to the third box, and of course, this is the box with the sun. And again, the same scenario. He asked to play with the box, and the old man refuses this time and wouldn't allow him to have the box. And so he fusses and cries until he makes everybody, exhausted, and he becomes sick, and the young daughter says to her father, is there anything that's more important than your grandson? And he says, well, maybe you're right, of course. So he places the box in front of him and tells him, don't open the box. And so what does he do? He transforms back into Raven, and then he flies through the smoke hole with the sun. And there are many different versions of this story, and so we're trying to work with lots of the community and bring in the details, as many details as we can for the exhibition. And so, in any case, so once the light is placed into the night sky, some of the people, they take off into the forest, they become the forest animals. Some of them take off, jump into the water and become the sea life. And then some of them take off into the sky and they become the birds. And then the people that remained where they were become the Tlingit. And so that is one theory of why there's this affinity to the animals and how they were eventually adopted as crest symbols for different families. And so the main crest symbols that you have is the eagle, and then you have the raven, representing two moieties within the community. And then under each animal figure are divisions of different house groups. This is the killer whale here. There. So it was in 1988 that I first started dabbling in this, and I met this guy, David Svensson, who's in the center, who had spent several summers in Alaska, and he had learned the carving tradition from the elders there and was adopted, and he had made all kinds of totem poles and what have you, rattles, and so he encouraged me on my path initially, and then in the summer of 2000, I met this guy, Joe David, who is Nuchanoth from Vancouver Island, but also works in styles of other Northwest Coast tribal styles, and was one of the guys that was really responsible for, or partly responsible for, bringing the artwork back into full focus. He and Robert Davidson, and there's others that have done that, but Joe took me under his wing, and we started working together in the summer of 2000, and that was an amazing experience. We worked together at the Pilchuck Glass School. He was, and I was charged with, helping him execute glass pieces at the school. And while he was there, he decided that he wanted to build a sweat lodge on the campus, and so we obliged him, and we built a sweat lodge up in this tree farm, this beautiful setting. This is not our sweat lodge, but just to show you a little bit of what a sweat lodge looks like. There's our sweat lodge. So for about 7 or 8 years, we did these ceremonies up at Pilchuck, and so for me, that really opened my eyes to Native spirituality, because I wasn't raised with any religious instruction. So for me, it was a pivotal point to meet Joe David and have him. There was one moment where after I'd never done a sweat lodge before, and I didn't know what to expect. So he told us that it was going to be a suffering and sacrifice ceremony, and those of us who were interested should come and talk to him. And after telling us what we needed to know, he would let us know if we were ready for the sweat lodge. And I was getting really nervous. I didn't know, like, the suffering and sacrifice, I was like, what's that? What's he going to do to us up on the hillside, And so we, big group of us had determined we wanted to go through this. And I told Joe, I said, I don't know. I said, look into my eyes, Joe. I don't know if I'm ready for this. And he goes, let me tell you this. He goes, you better be, because that was the thing, is that he was kind of like a transformation or an initiation, I guess you might say. But after 4 sweats we did, he adopted me and shared his name with me. And so for, and that was a tradition on the Northwest Coast, as that, you could receive different names throughout your lifetime, which would denote a change in your life. Maybe you would assume the name of a house leader, a traditional house leader, ancestral house leader, be passed down to you, or whatever. So this for me was like an amazing kind of affirmation that what I was doing was, it was going in the right direction. So this was a piece that I kind of made that as a tribute to Joe David, sharing with me his name, Kakawan Sheath, which means transforming killer whale, from supernatural wolf to killer whale. Let's see. So yeah, I spent a little time up in Haines. Alaska Indian Arts was another place. There's a carving studio started by this guy, Carl Heinmiller, who built this bit of a school up on the surplus Army land. He bought the barrack houses and then transformed it into a carving studio. So David Svensson brought the idea forth that we should make a totem pole for the Pilchuck Glass School. And so this was a project that happened in 2001. So the very next year after I met Joe, we're starting on this. This was already in motion. So Pilchuck was coming into its 30th year. And we wanted to honor John Halberg, who was the guy. He was the heir to Weyerhaeuser. He was big in the philanthropy community in the Northwest. He was a passionate Northwest Coast Native art collector. He gifted his collection to the Seattle Art Museum, and so we thought it befitting to make a totem pole for him, representing the founders of the school. And that's what totem poles do, is they tell a story, typically. And so we started working on this up in Haines, and we brought it down to the Pilchuck School. These are all the carvers that worked on it: Greg Horner, Wayne Price, John Hagan, Steve Brown. So John had repatriated a ceremonial dagger, a killer whale dagger, to a family in Angoon, and so as a result, he was also adopted and given a Tlingit name. So that was also part of the story there. So we asked permission from the family, which would have been protocol, to make a version of that killer whale dagger, and then we were going to transform it into a piece of glass. And at that time we had 6 Native American students, 2 of which had never even touched glass before, hot glass, so we invited members who had a connection with John Halberg's life over the years to carve objects. So this was carved by Marvin Oliver, who's the professor at the University of Washington. And so we're making these glass castings that we're going to inlay into the totem pole. So this is, here we are pouring the dagger that was carved by Steve Brown. And so here you can see the detail of that. As the hot glass is poured into this sand mold, you wait for that to set up, and then, or actually in this case, we took that whole pile of sand, that box, and we placed it into a giant kiln, and we let it cool slowly until down to room temperature. But Pilchuck is an amazing and dynamic place where I had really essentially learned how to become an artist, with glass, because So for me, it was like a rite of passage, the whole, having the Tlingit carvers coming down from Alaska. And so here you have the hot shop, and you have, we had the little totem pole right adjacent the hot shop, so people could come and watch and see what we were doing. And of course, anybody who had an interest in helping out was we found something for them to do. We had some elders from Klukwan, was a village outside of Haines, to come down and help us with the installation ceremony. And as a community, as a school, we brought, hand carried this totem pole to its installation spot. Some of my family came up, so we had about 100 invited guests come and watch us lift this totem pole into place. And so there's this hat that I made, and that's the only thing that I did for that, because a lot of people are, think it was, oh, that totem pole that you made, and I was like, I didn't carve it. The only thing I made was this hat. And all the carvers were talking about, everybody was asking me, when's the hat going to be done? When's the hat going to be done? Oh, I'm working on it. Yeah, I'm going to go sandblast it. And then the carvers were like, well, next time you need a hat stand, just give me a call, okay? But really it functions good. I thought I should go into business with it because it protects the end grain from rain, so it could be probably last longer as a result. So, and then of course I didn't mention it earlier, I forgot, but David Svensson is a neon tube bender, a neon artist, and so we hollowed through certain sections of this totem pole to backlight certain elements with neon. So here you can see this is perfect time of day where you get sort of like the natural light of you can see the sculpture, but then the light starts to pop out, and it kind of represents the way that abalone was used to ornament masks, but also as metaphorically we thought of as the northern lights that were shining inside the piece. And so this is the piece completed. The bottom figure is John Hauberg, who's shown with the killer whale dagger and the tana, which denotes that he was of high status. And he's wearing a wolf headdress, a shakiat that was called, his name was Guchki Yates, which means dark wolf. And then you have the central figure with Dale Chihuly holding on to the wings of the raven with the sun in its beak. So, it's kind of like alluding to the idea that Dale brought the idea of Pilchuck to the world, right? So, so it was a, whoops. And so in any case, we're, thinking very laterally in the way that we can interpret things. So anyway, sometimes when I'm getting really on a roll here, I'm going to try to speed it up here. I talk about some of the original inspiration that I had that led me to thinking about my process. Carlos Castaneda, of course, I had a really interest in dream analysis, and that led me to reading about Jung, who used a lot of Native American concepts in his analysis of dreams, vision quests and things like that, and how dreams were quite influential to Native people. So I spent some time reading, as much as I could. It's pretty hard stuff to read, but it eventually led me to practicing Aikido. And I did that for years and years, which to me also was a really interesting process of, it's like a moving meditation in a way. It's like the physical connection with other individuals, but then I also started to equate it with glass blowing, because when you're moving with this glass piece, you're always turning it, and it becomes like a Thank you. It becomes a process that is, it has lots of roots in Buddhism, Zen, meditation, and what have you. So, so for me, that was a real component of this kind of, different, broader perspective that I'm getting, all these varied approaches. And this Maori proverb, my accomplishments are not my own, but those of many. I would take that in two ways. In some ways I can think of it as that, I'm just the guy that is doing this with this material right now, but there were generations of ancestors that came before me, and there will be the ones that will come after me. So, really this collective is sort of a continuum, and I always say that glass has a defining historical connection to native cultures, which came through trade beads. Trade beads were quickly adopted and utilized for ornamentation, for clothes, and what have you. And so I kind of see glass as an evolutionary step to that. And as well, my team there, my accomplishments are also based on the fact that all those people are helping me in my studio today. So here's a couple of shots of my studio in Seattle. So everything I do is based on sandblasting. So this is a rubber stencil that's applied to the surface, and the designs are drawn directly onto the piece, and then they are sandblasted. So these little sections are pulled up and exposing the glass in various pattern ways, and then we take the sandblaster and you wear the surface of the glass down. So that's how I get all of the designs into the glass. You're wearing through layers of color to expose the color underneath. There's the hot shop. It's a small hot shop. I do most of my work there. So there you go. This was a piece that I called Journey to Aotearoa, which is the Maori word for New Zealand. So going to New Zealand was an amazing opportunity because you get to see people like that. And so we got together and we're sharing. So we're about 100 artists getting together and sharing our cultural perspectives and also different approaches, different mediums. So here's them doing the haka, the war dance, and that was my best attempt at looking like a fierce Maori guy. But they are really incredible people. They're very educated, very progressive, and very unified. So it's really inspiring to go and see what they've been able to accomplish. Getting Maori language TV stations and all of that. Also been to Hawaii. This is another trip that we made to Hawaii. And there we actually had a small glass studio. So I was able to share the glass making process with some of the people there. More examples. And I got really inspired and decided that I should have a moko, and that was kind of a funny story because I said, well, what I don't want to be culturally inappropriate. What would you give a guy like me? I mean, something that represents the fire or the sun or something like that, because I work around fire all the time in the hot shop. They said, well, that would be something like Ruau Moko would be, the god of volcano and earthquakes. And I said, oh yeah, that sounds good. I'd like to get that design, and because we always think of the hot glass as the lava, the molten lava, and so I was showing off my moko, and I was saying, so what was this guy's name again? It's like Ruau Moko. I said, yeah, he was God, right? He said, yeah, he's God, but he's kind of a mama's boy. You know, he's always like threatening to blow up a mountain or shake the earth, and his mom's always trying to calm him down. It's like, oh. It's like, that's indigenous humor for you. So anyways, so there you go. I have to live with that one. So collaborations, a little bit about collaborations that I work on with different, this is Tammy Garcia, who's Santa Clara Pueblo potter. They're working with the Southwest pot forms, and then using my technique of sandblasting the designs. And this is Dante Marinoni that we were prompted to do a collaboration by one of the galleries, the native art galleries. They were starting to work more with glass, and they brought Dante into the gallery. I thought it would be fun if we made a collaboration. So this is what we came up with. Kind of reflecting on so this is a very Italian glass blowing process that is inspired by basketry. So there's graphics that you get into the glass, and then I'm sort of embellishing it with Northwest Coast designs and basket designs, what have you. So there's always something to learn from working with other people, and it informs how I think about my work, and when I work with other people from different cultures, how do they interpret their symbols, and what do they because we all have the same kind of intellectual property issues going on with all of our cultural arts. So this was some of the stuff I've done with Joe David, whole variety of different kinds of dance frontlets, and exploring those from the New Channel culture. And this was with Lewis Gardner's jade carver. So the green element is a jade stone, and it's fastened to the glass sculpture as well. So there's the canoe prow, the waka. We call this one the salmon mother myth, and so these are pretty large pieces of jade as well. Get to work with people like Buffalo Man, and he's a Choctaw, so we're working with his cultural style, and these head pots are thought of as probably burial urns. This was Jody Naranjo. It's the last collaboration we did. And she was also Santa Clara Pueblo, did a little bit different style. So, I always, I take a lot of inspiration from looking at historical art. And since I didn't go to art school, I looked at art books and was looking for things that inspired me. And when I came across the Surrealists is when I realized that they were heavily inspired by Northwest Coast art, oceanic art. So here's contrast, but it's like a Northwest Coast mask and a Picasso. We all know that Picasso was inspired heavily by African art, so here you have that comparison there. So this is my Picasso, my play on that kind of thing, and this is like my Brancusi, and then so as I'm also now getting into more kind of abstractions, and sometimes they're inspired by amulet forms, sometimes they're just purely my own invention, or inspired by like a Noguchi or a Brancusi or what have you. So, and then sometimes I'll get back into the narrative part. So this is the origin of mosquitoes. So that's the mosquito that's kind of piercing through that piece there. This is an eagle and a raven. They share an eye. So the eagle's on the top with the hook beak, and then the raven has got the beak going down. And so, I like to think of it as sort of a modernist kind of sensibility, these spare organic forms, but then they're embellished with Northwest Coast designs. So playing with those kinds of abstractions is always fun. And a couple detail shots here, just because you can't always get too close to the piece. So this kind of shows you some of the detailing of some of the works. Albino killer whale. So certain things just occur to me, like there was sightings of albino killer whales, and so I thought I have to make one now. Of course, just playing with more different kinds of combinations of things, constructions, I call them. And as my skills evolve, I can bring more and more detail into the piece. And then sometimes I go down to Dave's coffee shop here. This is David Svensson, who was helping me with, this is his wife's work, or some of his and his wife's work collectively. But David is an amazing Renaissance man. He's got the sculptural approach. He's got the neon, illuminated neon stuff, but he's also a very talented carver. So I asked him to collaborate with me on a story of my great-grandmother who had a pet grizzly bear as a child. And so the story goes that there was some family members that were out hunting in the forest, and they shot this grizzly bear. It turned out that there's little cubs were rooting around, so they brought one of these grizzly bear cubs back to the village in Sitka where my great-grandmother was growing up. And she raised it as a pet, and she kept it tied up behind the house. And there was a lot of Russians in Sitka at that time, and there was a woman who made taffy, and the bear had this taste for taffy. So my great-grandmother would go out and she would pick berries in the forest, and she'd bring them back and sell the berries to get the taffy for her bear cub, until the bear got to be too big to keep around the house. And then somebody took it and said, well, I'm going to go take it and we'll go give it to a zoo. So it was the right thing to do at the time. So I took this to the Czech Republic, which actually they have a very old tradition of glass blowing and glass artistry there. They've developed the techniques of working with different colors and creating beads for fashion. So they were on the cutting edge of developing different colors for different different years, and so that technology still exists there. And so we went to work with them, and you can see some of the larger glass castings that they do here. So I worked with this studio to execute this one. So there you go. This was about 2,000 pounds of glass, and I think it's the first glass totem pole. And so this is the next one we're working on. This is the killer whale and the eagle. And this was the most recent piece that I had made for Sea Alaska. Is a corporation that was formed after the Alaska Native Claims Act, and the money and land was given back to the Native people, and corporations were formed to take care of the money and to manage the land. So Sea Alaska had created Sea Alaska Heritage, which is a division of Sea Alaska, which was helping with the language, protecting the language, and learning, working with the elders and recording it as, and so that we could teach it to the younger kids. So this was the interior of a sort of a performance space that represented the interior of a clan house. So we have these two Tlingit warriors on either side. It was house posts and decorative house posts covering the support beams within the longhouse, and then you've got the screen in the back. So that for me was a tremendous homecoming as well, just to be able to bring some of my work back into the community. A lot of the work that I do is sold to non-native people around the country, around the world. And so it was a real honor to get that piece back into the community. And then a little bit about the music. This was the piece I had made. I called it Blind Raven and Howling Wolf. This was back to the music that I'm working on. So I started this Native American funk band, and it was a kind of a performance art group, and we're sort of using storytelling, Native American music, and sort of a funk jazz background. So we're taking some traditional melodies, and we're coming in with a different kind of perspective. And so you can see it's kind of like a performance art show. We have James Luna, who's a performance artist out of Southern California. This is Gene Tagaban, who's a Tlingit tribal member. This is James doing one of his kind of theatrical antics. So it's quite a lot of fun. And we're working on this new group called, we call ourselves Kuiks, which means potlatch in the Tlingit language. And so we are, for me, this embodies the best music, sort of jazz, it's soul, it's dance, it's gospel, it's all of the above. So I thought, I don't hear that in native music, so I wanted to kind of experiment with this process a bit. This is a man named Bernie Worrell who's playing the keyboards, and he's an amazing musician who played with Parliament Funkadelic, in the 70s and 80s, and also the Talking Heads. So he's been working with me on interpreting this music. So we'll be releasing this material in probably April or May. All right. Thank you. So anyway, if you have any questions, happy to answer anything. I pretty much told you everything, so you shouldn't have any questions. But if there are questions, I'd be happy to talk to you. Okay. No, not so much. I mean, I have, I was expressing a little earlier, we had lunch, and I was talking about this elder had come up to us in Sitka, and he came up on his cane, and we were a panel of contemporary artists, younger artists, and he says, I want to ask each and every one of you, where do you get off making this stuff and doing this, and I want to hear your explanations about all this stuff. So we all were quaking in our boots, thinking, you're going to get hear it now. And so we all explained our perspectives, and we all said our piece, and then at the end he says, all right, next time you go to a raven potlatch, next time you go to an eagle potlatch, you put some money down. And then we walked off. No, really, I think there's mostly, I think, especially because my work is so out of left field, it just sort of takes them by surprise. It's glass, they're like, yeah, and they just kind of think it's cool. But I haven't been challenged by anybody from the community to say what I was doing isn't right. And I have lots of thoughts and stuff about the reasoning for it and how the system for creating the artwork has long since been dismantled, and it still happens on some level, but it used to be on a much grander level when the clan leaders were the ones that actually had the money and power, and they would amass wealth and they would redistribute it, through a potlatch system. But now the clan leaders are they are the figureheads, and they have a role, and it's very important, but I think that we're forced to go to the commercial market as artists, otherwise there'd be no good practicing working artists. So that's what I think about that. Yes?
Some of your early works, or I think they were earlier, had other materials like hair and other pieces of material, and I wondered what you used and how you chose those.
Yeah, sometimes, cedar bark, hair, just to kind of embellish, the verdict is out. Some people think they don't want a piece of, they don't want hair on their piece of glass art, so I don't know, you can't please everybody. But the cedar bark is a little bit, more accepted, I think, broader. But, I've worked with, feathers, and, I have to get legal feathers. I can't use legal feathers or anything like that. Cedar bark. I just try to use it as embellishment in the way that other materials were used, in tradition. Sometimes I'll take glass inlays and cut out the shape and inlay that into the glass, so it'll have like an iridescence to it. So, playing with that, the way that abalone inlays were used. So, yeah. Yes?
What's the future? Where do you see your art going? I mean, which direction or directions?
Well, I get really excited about the music, but I know it's not very realistic about making a living as a musician. So, but I've spent an inordinate amount of time thinking about it and working on. So the music that I'm working on, for one, is we're going to have a double LP, so we're releasing vinyl. So those of you who still have your turntables, you should order one. And if not, then you can. There'll be a digital download as well. So you can like me on Facebook, Little Big Band Kuiks as well. And we're going to keep people updated on that. But as far as the glass and the visual arts, I like the idea of getting deeper into the narrative and figure out why do you use glass and what kind of perspective, because it is a unique material. And in some cases, I think there are people that are, getting into making glass, sandblasted glass. They'll buy a piece of commercial plate glass and then they'll call it glass art. But I think that there's much more that goes into it with, if I make a panel, I usually make it in a very special way and use color. And, the more that you get into material, the more you can get out of it. So from a sculptural perspective or a narrative perspective, that's kind of where I would like to go. And that's like the big exhibition for the Museum of Glass. It'll be a big opportunity for me to explore the way of doing a narrative exhibition. And we're going to be using elements of sound as well as video projection. So creating effects that just have like very subtle shift, or creating like the fog rolling out of the cedar trees, or that kind of in fact, to create a backdrop for the objects in an art setting. So that's one thing that's going to be a big project. I also see the the big monumental totems is another direction, but they're very risky and they're expensive, and somebody's who wants to buy one has to usually retrofit their home, to support the 2,000-pound portable gun, in their home. So it's a commitment on all levels, and so it's the last one. It took us 2 years to make it. We had several breakages in the kiln. So when you're firing a piece of glass that big, the problem is that the cooling process is the most important, because glass is going from a liquid to a solid. So it's going through this molecular change, and it's going down to room temperature. So if you cool it too fast, the exterior is cold, but the interior is still hot. So it sets up tension, and it can pull apart from itself, and it creates a fracture. So we had about 4 failures in the kiln. So that was quite a learning curve there. And so, yeah, so those kinds of things. Yes?
I loved how you talked about your aunt picking up the piece, or asking to move the piece to the lighting table. And that even though you're using this new material with old forms here, she was the one who knew how to look at it.
Yeah.
And I think, just the gentleman asked the question about, does anyone ever say, how dare you? But I think that one thing emerging artists can, or anyone, can get, and how dare you, is when we're disassociated from our cultural roots, we're immigrants and we've left it behind, and we go back to that for our source material. And I think that, do you have any words of support to artists or writers and students who are disassociated perhaps from their families and?
Yeah, like sort of cultural roots and what have you.
Because I'm trying to think, what would your work look like if you had not gone back
Right.
to those images? If you
Right,
had not
right.
gone back to that tradition, what would
Yeah.
your work, what would we be seeing?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, because I mean, for me, it makes sense, because I came up through the ranks as a glass blower, and so all of a sudden then I realized, well, I knew all along I was a Native American glass blower, Alaska Native glass blower, and so I think that if you look at contemporary art, it's pretty easy to see the directions that people go: social commentary, historical, commentary, sculpture, different materials, combination of materials. I think it's really about, one of the things I talked about with Walter, we were talking about in terms of mythologies, is talking about this meditation that an artist gets into, and it becomes like a way of quieting the mind. And since as I mentioned, I was a glass blower, and I was working and making things, and it's okay, it's done. Glass blowers, it's a very physical activity. So I went from there to sitting at a table and drawing. So all of a sudden, I realized that I had the disposition to be able to do that, but it took a lot of time and a lot of focus and a lot of Walter Porter, one of my teachers, he would often quote a lot of biblical stuff, and he would say, like, look at the lily, it neither spins nor toils. It's like most of us are out there spinning throughout the world and just flitting from this to that to this, and our society also, we have a lot of distractions. We have Facebook, we have all these things that take us away from quieting our mind and becoming truly, that's where a lot of creativity is born, in a meditative process. I don't know how to develop it. I just know that if I were to tell somebody how I succeeded as an artist, I don't know if it would mean the same thing to them. So I think that there's those kinds of things that are kind of intangible, and you have to do a lot of research, I guess, to figure out a way of expressing all of that.
As a medium, the glass, what particular creative features it allows you as compared to the traditional medium of wood and metal?
I'm sorry, in the museum?
As glass as a material, as
Yeah.
a medium of your expression, what does it provide you as an artist as compared to those who
Oh,
are
I see, yeah,
wood
it's
or
the
metal?
material of glass itself, yeah. I mean, I think that, I mean, it's like the hat as an example. I mean, I didn't know what was gonna happen, it appeared, it was sort of like, a eureka moment, it became I just came to think that, the glass has, it's almost like a kinetic sculpture in a way. I mean, the way I think about it, maybe that's the wrong term, but, the fact that if it didn't have the correct light, you wouldn't see that effect. And also, if the light was coming in at an angle, it might cast these beautiful abstractions. So, I mean, the glass, again, the glass makes sense to me, but I also feel it brings another dimension to indigenous art and sculpture. And there's no other material like it that light is attracted to it. That's why I like working with some of the larger cast glass forms, because the way it attracts the light is just such a unique quality. I mean, there's no other material that can do that. And so, and I thought for years maybe that I would try to learn how to carve wood. And I've tried, I made my little eagle mask, but I haven't, I realized that to become exceptional with it, it would be a whole other lifetime to learn that. And so that's why I decided to stick with my own approach and see how far I could take it. And so, yeah. Yes?
I'm just kind of reflecting on both those last questions.
Mhm.
I saw your exhibit when it was in Spokane, and I was used to seeing Tlingit art and seeing it in wood and seeing the bent boxes and the pieces that were woven. And you almost had to know a lot about the religion and about the history and what everything meant when you're looking at them, so that you couldn't bring a lot to it or take a lot out just by looking at the objects.
Mhm.
But I walked into those rooms and saw your pieces lit up, and it was almost a spiritual experience. And I think when asking what the glass brings and what you brought to it was that you've animated those spirits inside, and it becomes much more lively, and you start getting the feeling of, I think, what they meant with the old materials.
Mhm.
And you presented that to us who are outside any kind of thing of American experience. But I think also your own people must see that it just brings it to another level that makes it much more spiritual than you can get out of much of the other materials. And I was just amazed.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of the masks and things were made for stagecraft anyways, and so, it just, it gives it a different platform. And it's interesting to see where it can go. So far it's keeping me busy, that's what I like to say.
One more question?
Yeah, sure, one more
question.
Actually, following up on that, I was just curious with this unique medium of the glass that you've used and the expressiveness that you talk about all the different tones and textures. If you've ever thought about doing things that would be more multimedia, like actually incorporating the music and the sculpture together.
Well, that's that's kind of what I'm going to do with the exhibition, along with the video backdrops. I'm working with the sound designer, sound engineer, and we'll be creating sort of soundscapes with voices that are going to be telling the story of Raven and Tlingit. So you'll be getting that, even though you won't be knowing what you're hearing. And then towards the end, it might morph into an English version. So we'll be creating like different soundscapes and different digital manipulations. Creating compositions and then slowing them way down and stretching them out, adding synthesizers to them, and then creating an atmosphere that would kind of you know, that with sound, you know, natural sounds like rain and fire and things like that. So that's it's definitely you know, in the plans